Wanga, who is the Dean of School of Social Sciences in Mizoram University. Sir.
Good evening, sir. We feel
yes, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. We feel very fortunate to have you as our speaker. And our university has been selected to organize this webinar for the celebration of 150 years of celebration of Mahatma Gandhi. And we are very thankful to you to say yes to our humble invitation. And today I say good evening to, or good afternoon or good evening to all the participants, learned participants, for sacrificing their valuable times to listen to your lectures. And now I would like to request the secretary, organizing secretary, Professor H.K. Fente, Professor and Head Department of Psychology, Mizoram University, and it's okay. Oh, okay. Then Fulbright alumni. Okay. Now I'd like to invite my esteemed colleagues, Professor Eskela Fete, to introduce our speaker to the participants. Take your time.
Okay. I'm very, very happy to do that. I was introduced to you by the Embassy of India in Tel Aviv, Ms. Mwanpui Sai-Oi, and Mr. Shering Sherpa, the Deputy Chief of Mission and the counselor are IFS officers in Tel Aviv. We are very, very grateful to them to bring you for us, sir, today as we celebrate 150 years of the Mahatma. I will introduce you, and before that, I will tell our participants a few ground rules about this webinar. And of course, before we invite you to speak, I think our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor K.R.S. Sambasivarao, is also here online to hear you speak, sir. So before we actually, yeah, I think sir is here. So the Honorable Vice Chancellor is here. He may I think he wanted to welcome you, he told me today. So that's why he's here, sir.
Sir, good afternoon, Professor Yohanan. We are very much grateful for your kind acceptance, and your topic is very interesting for me. How you are going to interpret non-violence with the Patanjali Yoga-sutra. It is really good. Actually, I want to listen. That's why I joined almost with you. I'm just silently listening. So she invited me to welcome you. We welcome you, sir. We thank you very much for your kindness in accepting our invitation, and our participants will be very much delighted to hear you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So we welcome all the participants today to this virtual online education and webinar, including this webinar, which was requested by the central government out of about 150 universities. We're very, very lucky to have been selected to do this webinar. We're very enthusiastic. And for the participants, I would like to announce a few ground rules about this. Of course, I'm sure you will have some questions, and Professor Yohanan will be able to, I hope, take a few questions at the end of the webinar, sir. I heard that you're going to speak about 40 minutes, sir. And after that, we'll take the Q&A. Please note that the questions will be taken only from the Q&A. So if you have questions for the professor, for our esteemed speaker today, please post your questions in the Q&A pane. And about the certificates, of course, we'll be giving out the certificates for participation in this webinar. That takes us about 1 week. So if you don't get your certificates immediately, please, please be informed that because we usually have a huge number of participants. So it takes a little time to organize that. Without further delay, let me introduce our speaker, Professor Johanan Grinspon. I hope I'm pronouncing
Yes, very good. Yeah.
correctly. It sounds like Greenspan, you know?
Yeah. It's all actually the same name, but I'm used to Grinspon.
Okay, I guessed it right. Yeah, okay, Professor Johanan Grinspon. He has been a very renowned faculty member and speaker at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, at the Department of Comparative Religion, where he was also the head of the department. And he earned his bachelor's and master's degree in the same university, Hebrew University of Jerusalem, in the Department of Philosophy and Sociology Studies first, and then Department of Comparative Religion, which he also headed under the Professor David Schulman. And he earned his PhD degree at the University of Pennsylvania in the USA at the Department of Oriental Studies. Professor Grinspon had written many articles and books, especially with regard to the study of India and its religions. Of course, naturally, he headed, the Department of Comparative Religion at the Hebrew University of Religion, Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. And one of his famous books that I browsed out is Silence Unheard, Deadly Otherness in Patanjali Yoga, and of course, Crisis and Knowledge, the Upanishadic Experience and Storytelling, published by the Oxford University Press and SUNY Press of New York. With respect to Gandhian thoughts, he has written many, he has taught undergraduate, master's, and PhD level, especially The Survival of the Conscious, a note on a Gandhian crow and a tiger's essence in the Hitopadesa. Very interesting. I have a whole lot of list about, the professor, the esteemed speaker that we have here today. But I think that should do it for now. And today we're very pleased that he's going to speak on Mahatma Gandhi's conception of the power of nonviolence in light of Patanjali's Yoga-sutra. Over to you, Professor Johanan Grinspon.
Thank you very much. Thank you really very much with so many compliments. What can I say? Actually, I remember Mahatma Gandhi himself, just by memory. I remember a story he told about his visit in London, 1930. And he was invited by the Oxford University to give him some honors, etc., etc. And the dean and the president of the university came up and said, well, Mahatma Gandhi, you are an incarnation of Jesus Christ in our age, and you are such a wonderful person, so unique, etc., etc., etc. And after some praises like this, Mahatma Gandhi asked the permission to say something. And he got up and he said, well, I'm very grateful of whatever you told about myself, such a great man, but I would like to tell you something. There are only 3 things I'm interested in my life. And these are power, power, power. That's what he said. I mean, this is a story I heard, and it's interesting, I think. And actually, after all your compliments, I cannot say something like that. There are no 3 things which I am interested in my life. But anyway, I was a reader a reader of the Yoga-sutra for many years, and also a reader of Mahatma Gandhi's writings, which amounts to about, I think, 100 volumes or something like that. And the question I have never been able to find out the answer to is whether Mahatma Gandhi was aware of the Yoga-sutra and to what extent. But I heard some years ago, a friend of mine told me that he did have a copy of the Yoga-sutra, of Patanjali's Yoga-sutra, in his pocket. So maybe he was aware of the Yoga-sutra, of Patanjali's Yoga-sutra. And actually what we are going to speak today is the intellectual benefits of listening to the Yoga-sutra and to the Mahatma together, and to see whether our discussion of the Yoga-sutra can shed any light upon the Mahatma Gandhi's experience of the power of ahimsa. This is the basic concept which we are going to deal with, the concept of non-violence and its power, according to Mahatma Gandhi. Of course, Mahatma Gandhi said it is the central concept of his life. He said the ahimsa, non-violence, so-called non-violence, because I'm going to a little bit discuss about the translation of ahimsa to non-violence. But Mahatma Gandhi said, ahimsa is the most powerful weapon at men's and women's disposal in this world. So a weapon, the most powerful weapon, and we'll refer to it later a little bit. But I would like to start talking about the Yoga-sutra. The Yoga-sutra, Patanjali's Yoga-sutra, a text, a treatise of yoga composed about the 3rd or 4th century AD. And it is actually indeed, it is the most authoritative text on the yoga tradition. Patanjali's Yoga-sutra, it's a very short treatise. It's about 195 sutras, short statements, divided into four chapters: the Samadhi Pada, the Sadhana Pada, the Vibhuti Pada, and the Kaivalya Pada. And the main goal, philosophical goal of the Yoga-sutra, of Patanjali's Yoga-sutra, is the discrimination, the distinction between the pure subject, so-called Purusha, and the pure object, so the Prakriti. I'm not going to talk about this dual metaphysics of Patanjali's Yoga-sutra, because this is too wide an topic of discussion. But I'm going to say that in the Yoga-sutra, it starts with a famous first statement of introduction, Atha Yoganushāsanam, now the teaching of yoga, and then the second one is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, Yoga hi, the putting off every type of mental vibration, something like that, the Yoga-sutra 1.2. And in general, it's a very harsh procedure, very harsh discipline, the yoga. A very harsh discipline, actually, in order to also eradicate the sense of suffering in one's life. I mean, for a yogin who is really knowledgeable about the discrimination and distinction of the pure subject, Purusha, and the object, Prakriti, for him, everything indeed is suffering. Other than that, I mean, he says, Dukkhameva sarvam vivekinaha. This is in Yoga-sutra 2.15. And what I would like to say, it's a very harsh type of a discipline. And one of the consequences of practicing yoga, according to Patanjali's Yoga-sutra, is the very long list of the siddhis. The siddhis are supranormal powers. And supranormal powers, and many people don't like the existence of such a long list of siddhis in the Yoga-sutra. But this will be the main focus of our discussion here. Because as you shall see, ahimsa is a siddhi. I think this is kind of an innovation of mine. Not many people would like to to assert such a proposition that Ahimsa actually is a siddhi, namely a supranormal power, as Patanjali sees it. But before going to that, I say that in general, the aim of the Yoga Sutra is to cultivate the discrimination between subject and object. And the most programmatic sutra of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is 228. I think it's Yoganga Anushtanad Ashuti Kshaye Jnana Deeptir Viveka Kyate. Viveka is a distinction between subject and object. And the practice of yoga is intended to that. And at the end of that, now, what matters here for us is a list of the siddhis consequent upon the practice of yoga. Supranormal powers, the siddhis. Now, I would like to give you some examples of the siddhis. I like to give you some examples so you can feel the sense of improbability and the title of supranormal powers of the siddhis. Let's say, for example, take the siddhi of disappearance. If the yogi practices meditation, intense meditation of the shape of the body, blocking the waves of light emanating from the body, naturally he disappears. He becomes invisible. What do you think? Do you think it's probable? Is it true? But never mind. This is a siddhi, the siddhi of disappearance. See the siddhi of, let's say, just by accidentally, I take the 317. 317, if the yogin is intensely aware of the distinction between the word, the meaning of the word, and the object of the word, if he is aware of this distinction, he becomes knowledgeable of the animal's language. Well, this is a siddhi. Oh, you can see if a yogin implements meditation on the Nabi chakra, on the central object of energy in the body, he becomes aware of anatomy, of the arrangement of his inner organs, etc., etc., etc. There's such a long list of siddhis, of supranormal powers, consequent upon yoga meditation. These are powers. These are powers of levitation and reading other people's thoughts, mind, etc., etc. These are so. This long list of siddhis for me is central to the Yoga Sutra. But from time immemorial, actually, all these siddhis have been denigrated as nonsense. As nonsense, even by some spiritual leaders of Hindu culture, such as Ramakrishna and others, many others, they thought of all these fabulous achievements of the yogin as obstacles to liberation and realization. And it was the siddhis have been denigrated throughout, even by scholars. Let's take, for example, one of the most important, well-known scholars of Indian culture, Max Muller. Max Muller said, something is so bad about these achievements, these supranormal powers. They are not actually worthy of any philosophical attention. They are worthy of a pathologist's attention. They are, and even he raised the hypothesis that maybe there were two Patanjalis. One Patanjali spiritual and philosophical, in assessing the difference between the pure subject and the pure object, and another Patanjali who actually says takes the siddhis seriously. And so there were so many people who, even Mircea Eliade in his book about yoga, immortality and freedom, he says, well, the siddhis are, the supranormal powers are obstacles to liberation and realization, etc., etc., etc. But I think it's not, maybe we should remind another example to the contrary. Take, for example, Swami Vivekananda. I say Swami Vivekananda wrote a commentary on the Yoga-sutra of Patanjali called Raja Yoga. Vivekananda wrote Raja Yoga after his visit, the famous visit to Chicago, 1893, the Parliament of All Religions in the USA, and he composed a commentary on Patanjali's Yoga-sutra, and in his introduction, he says something very interesting. I'd like to repeat. I hope I find it here. Let us see. He did have some sense of omnipotence consequent upon the practice of yoga. I mean, the association of yoga and power is very, very intimate and important to Swami Vivekananda. And see what he writes. This opens to us the door to almost unlimited power. Suppose, for instance, a man understood prana. Prana is life energy, something like that, breathing, life energy. Suppose, for instance, a man understood prana perfectly and could control it. What power on earth would not be his? He would be able to move the sun. Listen to that. He would be able to move the sun and stars out of their places, to control everything in the universe, from the atoms to the biggest suns, because he would control the prana. This is the end and aim of pranayama, exercise of breathing, according to Patanjali. When the yogi becomes perfect, there will be nothing in nature not under his control. If he orders the gods or the souls of the departed to come, they will come at his bidding. All the forces of nature will obey him as slaves. This is amazing, because Swami Vivekananda was a philosopher of kind. Yes, he was very rational. You know, all his transactions with Ramakrishna, etc. So he was something of this. And listen what he writes about his association of yoga with power. And we better say something, even see, when we see, I think I had it also, some statements of his to the effect of the urgent need of his to become omnipotent, to become omnipotent and knows everything and super powerful as to be omnipotent. But who cares, he says, listen to that, who cares to wait all these millions of eons? Why not reach it immediately, in this body even, in this human form? Why shall I not get that infinite knowledge, infinite power now? This is Swami Vivekananda, thinking, I think, much more higher of the siddhis than others. And also he said something very interesting about aparigraha, I think. Aparigraha is a non-acceptance of gifts or non-possessiveness. Aparigraha is one of the yamas in Patanjali's Yoga-sutra, and what is the result? The siddhi resulting from aparigraha is something a little bit unexpected. Out of aparigraha, one can know about his previous birth, about his previous life birth. And I think Vivekananda says, I'm not sure to that, but I think he says somewhere, Vivekananda says that he stopped getting gifts, presents of all kinds. And all of a sudden, he could see his previous life birth. Interesting, very interesting. So Swami Vivekananda is different in his attitude towards the siddhis, and I think it's very interesting. But nevertheless, what is most important to our present discussion is the following proposition. For Patanjali, Ahimsa, so-called non-violence, is a siddhi, a supranormal power. And when you see the listing of the siddhis in the Yoga-sutra, you have always to ask the question, what is the result of the practice of yoga? What is the result of Ahimsa? And Patanjali indeed devotes a special sutra to this question. And it's clear-cut. Ahimsa pratishtayam. I just have to remember, yes. Ahimsa pratishtayam tat sanidhau vairat yagaha. In the vicinity, in the proximity of a yogin immersed and established in Ahimsa, all violence ceases. There is cessation of vaira. Vaira, tyaga is a cessation of violence. Think to that. What do you think? Is it true? Is it true? Because if it's true, it's revolutionary. It's a strategy that can change the world all at once. And I think it really captures Mahatma Gandhi's view of Ahimsa as an irresistible weapon at the disposal of men and women. Irresistible in terms of its being omnipotent. It's the most powerful weapon of humankind. That's what I think Mahatma Gandhi thought, but I would like to say something about the concept of Ahimsa. By the way, if you have any questions, you can. I don't care if you interrupt me by questions. What is Ahimsa? Now, most often Ahimsa is translated as non-violence. It's kind of a noun derivation of hims. Hims is to strike, to injure, to kill. Hims. That himsa is the killing, striking, injuring. So non-violence is ahimsa, according to this translation, is just you don't do that. You don't do the striking or the injuring, etc., etc. But I think ahimsa, I translate ahimsa differently. Ahimsa is himsa is the wish to kill. Ahimsa is at the desiderative derivation of han, to hurt, to injure, to kill. Hanti, he kills. Now, what I said is ahimsa is the giving away the wish to kill, not only outwardly, I mean, not to hurt anybody, to strike or to injure, but ahimsa is a derivation of the root han, and a derivation of the root han, which is something quite else, because the depth of transformation implied is different. If you actually uproot the wish to hurt and to kill or to injure, is something else than just not to kill. Or you understand what I mean? I see, grammatically speaking, himsa can be said as a desiderative derivation of han, desiderative, grammatically speaking. But I think there is some controversy over this. But most people think that ahimsa is just the non-actually hurting any living creature, etc., etc. But I think it's much more adequate to translate this as the relinquishment of the wish to kill or to hurt. This is something quite different. And if you look at Patanjali's Yoga-sutra, you see that he devotes much thought to this question. And he says, in fact, normally I can tell you something. Do you remember the list of cities I've referred to, I mean, reading other people's thoughts and reading and become, let's say, disappearance and the disappearance of levitation and knowing the arrangement of the limbs in the body, etc., etc. So these are all sorts of you CDs, and I can tell you something. I'm not a practitioner of the CDs or yoga, but I can still read your thoughts. I can still read your mind. You think it's all rubbish, it's nonsense. As, as most of the scholars and even spiritual traditions of India consider them. The siddhis are nonsense, it's just bullshit. Unlike Vivekananda, let's say, and also unlike Patanjali, because he devotes much thought to the siddhis. And you see, when we get to Ahimsa, the Ahimsa is the first siddhi. I mean, and Vyasa, Patanjali's commentator, arch commentator, Vyasa says, Ahimsa, and the consequence of Ahimsa is the cessation of violence in the vicinity, in the neighborhood of the yogin, immersed in Ahimsa. And he says, this siddhi of the cessation of knowledge is a suchaka, it's a sign of the success of the yogin in implementing Ahimsa. And so you see, Ahimsa is a supranormal power, and it's important. It's important for us to understand how it reflects in Gandhi's self-understanding and self-confidence. Because actually, as I was always interested in Mahatma Gandhi's self-confidence, I always asked myself, what is the source of such self-confidence? Because you know, Mahatma Gandhi encountered lots of audiences in his life. Many of them were hostile. And he didn't lose confidence. He was very self-confident and also fearless, especially fearless with respect to death, which he said. He wrote to his brother about it. So I think, what is the source of such self-confidence? And I think reading the Yoga-sutra gives me some hint as to that. Because Ahimsa, and he said, Ahimsa is a major strategy in life. Ahimsa and Satyagraha for Mahatma Gandhi. And I think in his life and writings, Ahimsa is a major focus of his life. And that's what he says. And I think looking at Ahimsa as a supranormal power, irresistible, gives us some hint as to the source of his self-confidence and self-understanding. Although he doesn't say that. He doesn't quote Yoga Sutra 235. Remember Yoga Sutra 235? Ahimsa Pratishtayam Tat Sanidhau Vaira Tyagaha. He doesn't say that, but this seems to be the epitome of his life, actually. Actually, Yoga Sutra 235. As if it's a supranormal power, it's a problem. Let's, at the end, maybe we refer to that. Now, when you think about this, I just remember now, I thought when Professor Fente read in the beginning, in her introduction, she read something about the crow and what's the crow and some, I don't remember. Now I remember something which is a famous story of the Hitopadesha. I would like to repeat the story just because you reminded me of the story of the Hitopadesha. In the Hitopadesha, maybe the king of the mice, maybe the king of the crow wanted to be a friend of the king of the mice. And the king of the mice, he came to the king of the mice and he told him, I wanted to be your friend. And the king of the mice said, go away. We are enemies. We have always been enemies. And so for your own sake, go away. And he says something very nice. He says, even hot water, boiling water, even hot water puts off fire. I mean, even they are very hot and sort of very close to being so hot, like as fire is, they put off fire. You see what I mean? So he says, so let us say, you have your own swabhava, your own nature, you are king of them. I think it's crows or pigeons, yes, the crows, you see. And we are mice, you are crows, we are different. We can never have any peace treaty between enemies. This is impossible. And for the sake of us two, go away, we are enemies. And the other one said something. He said, no, I want to be your friend. And I go now to your house and I sit down next to your door and I say, until if you don't make me a friend of yours, I shall die, because I'm not going to eat and to drink anything until you consent to be my friend. And the other one said, okay, because you are coherent in your thought, speech, and behavior, I take you to be your friend. This is very interesting. That's what I thought. This was a Gandhian kind of encounter of this. This is very interesting. It's a nice story. Thank you for reminding me of this story. It's a very nice story. It's somewhat unusual in the Hitopadesha, because most of the Hitopadesha actually say something else. It's, Swabhava cannot be contradicted. Swabhava is Swabhava. And if you are, but here, this is a Gandhian story. This is nice. Thank you for reminding me of that. So now as to Ahimsa. Ahimsa is a supranormal power, is a siddhi, and as a siddhi, what do we think about it? Is it empirically true? Is it empirically true? And is Gandhi's biography, Gandhi's life attests to this or not? I don't know. I think much research is invited here, but we can see that what is the nature of Ahimsa according to Patanjali, and I think this is very much close, it's very close to Gandhi's own conception of Ahimsa. To begin with, Ahimsa is universal. Strictly speaking, by definition, Ahimsa is universal. For example, Patanjali says, if you consider yourself someone who is committed to Ahimsa, and if you say, well, I am committed to Ahimsa, but I hunt for fish because I'm a fisherman. I need it for my survival, that's all. I eat fish. I kill fish just because in order to survive. Other than that, I am committed to Ahimsa. And Patanjali says, no, this is not Ahimsa, because Ahimsa is unconditional and universal. You cannot say that. And if someone comes and says, well, I am committed to Ahimsa. Ahimsa is a great value, but Monday and Thursday, 2 days of holy statues, I go to the temple and I just sacrifice all sorts of animals just because this is a tradition. But other than that, I am committed to Ahimsa. And Patanjali says, no, you are not committed to Ahimsa, to non-violence. This is not Ahimsa. I mean, this is Himsa. This is very, very radical to say that. Another one says, well, I take the life of creatures only at the temple. When I must do that according to tradition. That's what I do. Other than that, I am committed to Ahimsa. And now, what is much more problematical is the soldier. If the soldier says, well, I am committed to Ahimsa, but in the battlefield, I am obliged to follow the orders of the commander, and I have to kill just because this is my job here as a soldier. And Patanjali says, no, you are not committed to Ahimsa. This is not Ahimsa. Ahimsa is universal and unconditional. And this is very, I think it's very powerful, because Patanjali devotes thought and reflection on Ahimsa more than any other supernormal power. And he says many things about Ahimsa as actually the most important field of the yamas and the niyamas, of all the prescriptions of the way of life. Ahimsa is the most important, the central, the most important. And even he says, Vyasa says in his commentary, but scholars very often now they say that Vyasa and Patanjali are the same. And Vyasa says, well, all the yamas are introduced by Patanjali in order to elevate the field of Ahimsa. Ahimsa is very important. Ahimsa is very important. Now you see that, and now we think. I think what main to say the most important thing. If Ahimsa is a supranormal power, siddhi, and if it is it denigrated as other cities, or is it of the same status of other cities? I don't know, but I see when I read Patanjali carefully, I see that he diagnoses the human condition very, very accurately. I mean, other than he asks himself the benefits of Ahimsa, and he writes about the normal, ordinary, normative human condition of non-ahimsa, of himsa. He called it vitarka himsadaya, all these inner predispositions of men and women other than ahimsa, which are himsadaya, vitarka himsadaya. And we see Patanjali diagnoses the human condition in much detail to say that how ahimsa is important. He says, for example, he says that when there are three types of himsa. Three types of himsa. Himsa, namely violence. Violence done by oneself. Violence done by oneself, but oneself is made to be violent by others. And also violence approved of by oneself. This is interesting. You see how prevalent himsa is in our life. And then he starts diagnosing the himsa even more in detail. He says there are three roots of himsa, namely hatred, greed, and confusion. And then he says something about the level of intensity of everything. And I think I counted about 84 varieties of himsa in life. So you see that Patanjali is very interested in the current human condition. And it's not, when he speaks about ahimsa, he speaks about some kind of a remedy or some kind of an antidote, a very radical antidote to the ordinary condition of man and woman. And now we see when you see this, you see Patanjali is very empirical in his attitude towards the eradication of the vitarka, himsadaya, etc., etc. And I think this places ahimsa as something which is almost omnipotent or necessary antidote or element in transforming the current human condition. Man is bad, but should be cured by ahimsa. And I think this is interesting. I think this is the power of ahimsa to change the world. Whether this is true or not, I don't know, because I've always been interested in that, and I thought maybe, and I spoke with historians, etc. I wanted to read carefully the histories of satyagraha campaigns of Gandhi in South Africa and in India. I do not know whether ahimsa is so potent, but it's interesting, I think, and I think this unconditional aspect of ahimsa, is very important. And I think if you read carefully Gandhi's autobiography of the year 1906, and you see the starting point of his commitment to, I think, also to ahimsa and also to continence, etc., etc. I think in the Jewish Museum in Johannesburg, 1906, he wanted everyone to take the highest type of oath and commitment, unconditional commitment to the pledge to ahimsa. remember also, I think this is important. I think this goes very well with Patanjali's own conception of the unconditional nature of ahimsa. And so ahimsa is a perfection, a siddhi, a supernormal power. And I ask myself, how has Mahatma Gandhi become like that? Is his life experience, that's what I thought to myself always, he becomes so self-confident throughout his life, especially since he stay in South Africa. How has he become so self-confident? What is the source of his self-confidence? Is it his mother, his father? What is it? He has become so self-confident, so fearless. And I asked myself how. And then I look again at the Yoga-sutra. And I think at the Yoga-sutra and it says, how does one obtain the siddhis? And he says, one can obtain the siddhis by using drugs. One can obtain the siddhis by samadhi, by the practice of the highest meditation. And also one can get to the achievement of the supranormal powers, the siddhis, by birth. And what I say to myself, by birth, namely by previous types of birth, like the life birth stories of Jatakamala, of Buddha, etc. Because I think Gandhi's self-confidence comes from nothing else than the previous birth. This is what Patanjali says about the achievement of the siddhis, of the supranormal powers. Other than that, I cannot find any explanation, because I think Gandhi really was exceptional self-confidence. And I see when his treatment of the plague in Johannesburg, and he was so fearless, you see, not to catch the plague, to catch the disease. And I think, how come? Whence comes this fearlessness? And I think from previous birth. Other than that, I cannot find any explanation, because I think he was unique in a sense. For me, he was great and unique. And I think there is something mystical, something unusual about his self-confidence and this. Do you have any question for the time being?
So not yet. We have a whole lot of questions, but we'll ask at the end, sir.
Yes. Okay. Just it will be very helpful for me, as you know. Yeah. Okay. I can say something else. I mean, in some sense, I mean, you can say that the DNA of the Hindu culture and society is suffused with the concept of power. I think almost I can say that Mahatma Gandhi also inherits some kind of this sense of power. Because I say self-confidence. Self-confidence. What does it mean, self-confidence? And I just would like to tell you another story, very well-known story from the Upanishads. It's from the Kena Upanishad. In the Kena Upanishad, you see the gods, Indra and others, Indra and Varuna, I think, and others, they thought that their victory over the Asuras is due to their own success, own power, on whatever. And they praised themselves. We have won over the Asuras, the demons or so. And there was and Brahman, which is the real force or power beyond everything, he made himself appear as a kind of apparition. I don't know what kind of apparition. And the gods were curious about this apparition, and they sent Agni, the god Agni, the god of fire, to Brahman. And and the Agni came to Brahman, and Brahman asked him, "Who are you?" This is always the question. Who are you? And Agni says, "I am the god of fire." And Brahman asked me, the apparition asked him, "What can you do?" And he says, "I can put in fire everything, everything on earth. I can burn everything in this world from bottom to top." And so Brahman took some, I would say, some leaf of some grass, and then burned this. And he started boom, to put fire into this piece of grass, and nothing happened. He was actually bewildered, and he came back to his friends, the gods, and said, "I don't know what it is." So they sent forth Vayu, the king of wind, and he came to the apparition to Brahman, and Brahman asked him, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am the king of wind. What can you do?" I can whatever I can. I can move everything by air to everywhere. And said, "So take this piece of grass, please. Take this piece of leaf of grass and just do something." He said, "Foo, foo, foo." He said that, and nothing happened. And then he came back and he said, "Well, I don't know what's going on, but there's something. I was powerless." And this is a question of the power beyond things, beyond the ordinary normative power. I think this is something very unusual for us to think of, because we feel that we are powerful, we are forceful, we can do everything in life. But you see that the underlying force or the underlying power may be different. And it seems that according to Patanjali Yoga-sutra, at least, power is not exactly the it's not part of the normative, ordinary, usual, everyday life of men and women. I mean, it's something else. And I think it's not so, in these times of plague, by the way, we sometimes think maybe this is true. Maybe we don't know everything. Maybe something from beyond comes up. Anyway, this is a notion of power, I think, which is very, very common in the Indian tradition. The traditions of India, I think, is part of the DNA which also Gandhi, I think, inherits. Even the power which is reflected in the Upanishadic literature. And I think when I say now, I say to myself, maybe the concept of self-confidence, which I don't know whether you agree with me, but I think Gandhi was the most self-confident man on earth. And once this self-confidence, so maybe also it is part of the Upanishadic tradition or the Indian tradition of knowing the self, knowing who you actually are. Actually, I don't think whether Gandhi was aware of this source of power in his being, as constitutive of his self-confidence. But still, I think sometimes in his autobiography, I don't know whether in his autobiography, in his letters, he thinks, my goal in life is moksha. I think he also inherits this kind of an ideal of the beyond, etc., etc. Yes, what else? What else? Now, I would like to end this talk by reflecting on the nature of ahimsa. I say now non-violence, but in the second sense. I said, ahimsa is a desiderative of Han, as a supernormal power. Because I tell you what I think. I think about the world, and I think about the catastrophes inherent in nature in the last 150 years. It is a catastrophe of history. And I think to myself, what does it mean that we call ahimsa, as in Gandhi's view, the only, let's say, siddhi, which can be an antidote to current civilization. What is the nature, what is the meaning of our reflection of Ahimsa as a siddhi, as a supernormal power rather than a normal power? Is it a kind of the lack of confidence in our natural, ordinary way of life and powers to transform the world? When you say it's a supernormal power, Ahimsa, it's something which you see there is a dilemma. On the one hand, Ahimsa can change the world. On the other hand, it is impossible because it's a supernormal power, not shared easily by men and women. I mean, in this, if you think seriously about Ahimsa is a supernormal, suppose it's a kind of an argument. If Ahimsa is a supernormal power, if it's a siddhi, if it's a supernormal power in the siddhi, and if it is the only instrument of transformation in this world, then perhaps mankind is doomed. And what I said, I inherit, actually, I tell you the truth, I inherit something of my great teacher at the Pennsylvania University in the USA. He was Professor Wilhelm Halfas, and he died very young. He died 60 years old. And we had many talks about Western civilization, that he loved Western civilization, but he was very anxious about its fate, because he thought it's a kind of a very ugly civilization at the moment. It objectifies men and women. It is bad. He thought, and he said the only antidote is India, Indian philosophy and something, whatever. He said that, but at the end of his book, India and Europe, but also in our conversations, with private conversation, he told me, maybe India is the Indian culture, India is the only antidote to this current state of mind and existence of Western culture. But maybe also it is now impossible to translate this into this. Maybe it's impossible. And sometimes I thought that maybe his premature death at the age of 60, which is really very young, I think this is come for kind of a heartbreak because of this impossibility of translating Indian philosophy and everything into the Western world. But I think also our reflection of Gandhi's non-violence or Ahimsa as supernormal also invites this kind of suspicion and doubt, and also maybe hope, because after all, Ahimsa, according to Gandhi, was the most powerful instrument at men's and women's disposal. And so this is a dilemma. Whatever, is this world doomed, or is there some hope? I don't know. But our reflection of Ahimsa as a supernormal, as a siddhi, points to the less favorable direction. I think this is maybe too pessimistic, but that's what it is. Yeah. What else? What else, Professor Fente?
Yes, sir. So we have a whole lot of questions.
Yes, questions. I like questions.
Yeah, if you're done with what you would like to.
I can add here now, but I prefer questions. I love questions.
We know that you have a whole lot more to say, to speak. And of course, we've been very, very engrossed in what you've been saying, but yeah, I think, we should go to the questions. But
Yes.
I think, Sir, the coordinator here,
Yeah.
who has been so engrossed, also needs to
Well,
say something.
we were studying in the elementary school. Well, we were in class 3. One of our lessons from the textbook was Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the nation. And your today's lecture reminds me of where I studied so many years back. Therefore, today's lecture is very special for me because my Andaman knowledge or my Latin knowledge has been refreshed by the content of your lectures. Therefore, I express my helpfulness to you for delivering a thought-provoking and enlightening lectures. Thank you very much. Now I'll call upon my esteemed colleagues to read out 2 or 3 questions, uh, which will be which will be answered by you if you do not face any problem. Thank you.
Okay. If you just want, I can enlarge upon Patanjali's view of the supernormal powers and add some more specimens, some more examples. But maybe what I said was enough in order to understand the the major proposition of my talk. The kind of this is the status of Ahimsa, the supernormal power, according to Patanjali, whether it reflects, it sheds some light on Gandhi's own self-confidence and self-understanding. This is it. If you want to add, if you want me to add some things, man, the CDs, by the way, the CDs have been my main focus many years ago. Not nowadays, but many years ago. Actually, the subject of my dissertation was on the CDs, the meaning of the CDs, etc., etc. In Patanjali's Yoga-sutra. This is my dissertation under Professor Wilhelm Halbfass. So I can add and add about this, but it doesn't matter much because you have understood my main focus and my main proposition.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. I see that a number of questions might have already been answered as you were speaking. So I will pick out only a few questions. And by the way, we are live on YouTube, and this lecture will be uploaded in the Mizoram University's YouTube channel. So anybody who would like to go more in depth and hear again about the deep translation of Ahimsa, how godly it is, the supernatural power, and for psychologists, very psychological. We can go again to hear you on live YouTube at Mizoram University's YouTube. So I will
Even before you can if you can collect some questions, yes, of course, but I would like to just to add something about something piquant about the cities. If you take, for example, Yoga-sutra 340, I think 345, and you see all these cities mentioned there about becoming very big or becoming very small, and you think, what power is this? Is this nonsense, or is there something important to that? And I think one answer is that it is a feature of imagination, but not imagination as some fantasy. It's not fantasy, but it's imagination. Imagination, according to David Schulman's conception of bhavana, bhavana is imagination, and the root is bhu, and it's a causal derivative of bhu, to be. Saying imagination is cause to be. Remember, cause to be. It's not mere fantasy. It's cause to be. And if you think about this, I have not remembered to speak about imagination, the power of imagination. This kind of imagination, this is bhavana. Bhavana is part and parcel of Patanjali's own understanding of the power of consciousness. See, for example, he says that what is the measures possible to enact ahimsa. It is, he calls that pratipaksha bhavana. Pratipaksha bhavana, the imagination to the contrary. I mean, it's very, very detailed type of a procedure in order to change one's life. It's imagination. Imagination is not as fantasy or just mere imagination as you call it here in the West, but imagination is bhavana, a derivative of bhu, causing to be. Imagination causes to be. And when Patanjali says in Yoga-sutra 234 that the measure to encounter himsa, the wish to kill, I mean, the measure is to imagine the contrary, whatever it is. Let's read Patanjali to more in detail. But you see, the power of imagination is there. And when you see Yoga Sutra 345, it is Yoga Sutra 345, it refers to all sorts of cities as becoming big or becoming small or moving through solids and all sorts of things that you ask yourself, is it nonsense? Is it really nonsense? And also another question, why doesn't the yogin change the world? Because if you, all of you maybe know, you know of the famous book Autobiography of a Yogi or something like that. I think it was, I don't remember now the name of the title of the book, but he says something about the world is made of light. Let's us just, we can just create it as we like. Say, so why don't you do that? I ask him. I would ask him, why don't you do that? And actually, when you read Yoga Sutra 345, and you see there is a Purva Pakshin there, some opponent who says, who asks question, he doesn't ask a question, but the action is implied. The question is implied. He says, so that why doesn't the yogi change the world? If he can do anything, he can become big and small and move through solids and everything. And the answer is, I think, as far as I remember, something like, Shaktopi Navi Paryasam Karoti. Although he doesn't want to. He can change the world, but he doesn't want to. But this is not according to Gandhi's own self-understanding in this respect. Gandhi thinks that one should change the world, but by practicing ahimsa, which is ahimsa and satyagraha.
Okay, sir. I'm going to shoot you a question by Dr. Santosh Kumar Raut. He is a lecturer in political science from Odisha in India. His question is how Gandhian idea and the practice of Yoga Sutra on Patanjali ideology could help for curing mental maladies of men during COVID-19 period.
Well, it's a
From
good,
to now.
maybe it's a good question, Kes. It's a good question, I think so. First of all, to say something about the yoga tradition. Patanjali sees yoga as what he called Chikitsa Shastra. It's a science of medicine, actually. It's medicine, actually. It consists of four it's just kind of it consists of four levels. First of all, the symptom is dukkha. It's suffering. Then the cause of dukkha. The second truth is the cause of dukkha, which is wrong self-understanding, namely making a kind of mixture, unlawful mixture of the subject and the object. This is something like that. This is something philosophical. And the third one is imagination, and the imagination of the condition of non-disease of remedy, and the remedy is the Yoga Sutra, the medicine, the Ashtanga Yoga. Ashtanga Yoga is the medicine of men and women. And the question is what to do about the the COVID-19. There's something I don't know. Anyway, this is a good question because maybe according to if you ask Patanjali, he said, know yourself. If you do know yourself as kind of an individual which is different from what you think, it's if you do discriminate between the pure subject and the pure object, and you don't see this kind of mixture between the two, which is unlawful, this is what makes you sick. If you do understand, if you do discriminate between subject and object, then you, by definition, becomes healthy. So what can I say? This is it.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Another question is from Mrs. Momita Bhattacharjee. My question is that, sir, Sankhya philosophy holds that knowledge is the means to liberation. Patanjali's yoga insists on the method of concentration
Concentration. Yeah. Hello? Yes.
by
Sankhya
liberation.
Yoga. Yes. Sankhya Yoga is different from Patanjali Yoga. Sankhya is different. Sankhya is basically a kind of an intellectual education. Intellectual education aimed to discriminate between the pure subject and the pure object. And this is actually the cessation of dukkha, and also this is it. This is the basic medicine of man. Intellectually is enough. It's enough. But Patanjali Yoga is quite different from that, because Patanjali requires concentration and asanas, yogic postures, and pranayama, exercise of breathing, etc., and meditation, of course, of all kinds, meditation of all kinds. And so Asya is very different from Sankhya. Sankhya is something else. And Patanjali Yoga is, I think, very different from that, because of his insistence on practice. And also, even I think a major concept of Patanjali Yoga, which is samadhi, the highest type of meditation, doesn't exist in Sankhya Karika, in Sankhya Karikas, in Ishvara Krishna's Sankhya Karika. It doesn't exist there. Even samadhi, all sorts of cities, of course, do not exist there. So I would say they are very different. And without practice, another question, which I think historically speaking, is whether Mahatma Gandhi exercised any yoga. If you see Swami Vivekananda, he did exercise yoga. You see, he recommended sitting erect, etc., etc. But according to Gandhi, I really don't know whether Mahatma Gandhi exercised yoga. I don't know. It's a good question for me now. If anyone, well, I don't know.
Okay, the next question and the last question, sir, today is asked by Professor Joyti Kumar of Mizoram University. He says, I'm delighted to listen to this eminent speaker. Do you think that the Mahatma's principles are more relevant in 21st century than his times, especially in addressing the global crisis due to COVID pandemic?
It's a good question. It's a good question. It's a good question. I think, in general, that unlike many others, I mean, nowadays it's many people doubt or suspect Mahatma Gandhi's greatness. Many people do, and I don't know. I have heard so many things about it from all sorts of people, even in India. Many people despise Mahatma Gandhi. Even if you think, maybe many people find some merit in Gandhi's assassin, murderer, Nathuram Godse. Nathuram Godse said, well, and he said, Nathuram Godse said, Mahatma Gandhi made India weaker than it had been before. And actually, when Mahatma Gandhi speaks of ahimsa, this is the weapon of the weak, not the weapon of the. It makes one weaker than the. Many people I heard when I spoke to many people in India, I heard this, that they think Mahatma Gandhi it makes us weaker rather than stronger. But I think, and he's not great at all. But my own perception is Mahatma Gandhi was a great man, and I do not deny his greatness. And I think his greatness makes him, I think, relevant everywhere, because he's very deep. He's very deep. I think he's a very successful person, very successful, very self-confident, and I think there is no one like him. I think in history he's the last one. That's why I think sometimes that if Ahimsa is the real antidote to current civilization, and if there is no one who can exercise Ahimsa anywhere, then I think maybe the world is doomed. But I think that doesn't deny Gandhi's greatness. But I think maybe he's even more relevant today than ever. Maybe he's more relevant today than ever, and that's what I think. But it's my own personal kind of perception. I don't know. I don't know. But I think yes, he's for me he's relevant. I think reading Mahatma Gandhi is good. It's good to the soul.
Okay, so I would like to give it back to the coordinator here.
Mm.
No academic or official function is complete without proposing a vote of thanks. And as the coordinator, I take this opportunity to express my heartfelt thanks first to Professor Yohanan Greenspan, a learned scholars from Israel. And I also, I also express my sincere thanks to all those learned participants in this webinar, uh, sacrificing their valuable times to listen to this lecture series. It is our wish and prayer that this lecture might enhance your knowledge at least a little bit, if not great. Okay? That's why this lecture series is, even for me, very good in the sense that it has enriched my knowledge, as I've spoken of before. This reminds me of what I studied so many years back about Mahatma Gandhi as the father of the nation, in which we studied Satyagraha, Swaraj, and Ahimsa, non-violence, and all these things. And let this lecture reminds me of virtues or good characters in the life of Gandhiji. I must not forget to express my heartfelt thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sampasiva Rao, who is all the time ready to promote academic excellence. Like, though he's the Vice Chancellor, then if necessity compels him, then he can work right from morning till late night. We have such kind of Vice Chancellor. We are very fortunate. The Vice Chancellor who is all the time busy with promoting young faculty members and scholars to make advancements in this academic world. Therefore, I express our heartfelt thanks on behalf of my esteemed colleagues, our heartfelt thanks to our resource persons and all learned participants in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
all
And
this,
yes, and we continue to celebrate the Mahatma. Thank you so
okay.
much, sir.
All the best to you.
All
All
the
the
best
best.
to you, sir.